Welcome back to the discussion. Of course, we're talking about gender-based violence and how to end it, of course, during these 16 days of activism. Now, of course, I'm still here with my panelists, and this part 2 of the discussion, we are looking at, of course, the solutions. But I want us to just start off by talking about some of the commitments that Kenya had made during the Nairobi summit, of course, in 2019, during the ICPD 25 on ending GBV. So what is the status of the implementation of those commitments? I want to start with you, Josephat.
Thank you very much. Kenya at the ICPD made 17 commitments. 3 of them were based on gender. The first commitment was about ending FGM by 2022. And you recall that the government made a directive in that respect. And a lot of effort has been put in regard to that. The Anti-FGM Board, which is a function of government, has gone out, reaching out to stakeholders, both internally and across the region, in order to work that out. Some of the things that have happened, interventions that the board has put in place, is having communities come together through community dialogues and even make declarations. I remember in Saburu last year, we had a declaration that was made called the Kisima Declaration, that the elders decided that we are going to counter these community values that make it impossible for women to prosper. The other declarations that have been made in the effort, but also significant, is that the board, the government through the board, invested in bringing together the East African region countries that have a part in playing a role in FGM issues. So there is already a partnership, an agreement, and a discussion. We had a ministers conference. Several, I think, and other interactions on FGM. We are also, I know there is investment in the rites of passage in the communities, especially the 22 communities that practice FGM, that is continuing. And I know the board has also established or developed guidelines to that effect, so that we can have standards that can be used across the counties and the communities. The other efforts that have also been made in the ICPD commitment number 14, that was adding gender-based violence in the next decade, that goes up to around 2029 towards the end of the Vision 2030. And a lot of effort has been put towards ending gender-based violence, both in prevention and response. I recall that during the onset and apex of COVID-19, response mechanisms were put in place to counter this. Among them, and preceding that event, was a multi-sectoral technical team that was put in place to advance that agenda. And we have many more. Also, we have an investment with stakeholders, development partners. Currently, we are also having a program that is Kenya Pillar Bilateral Program, investing close to 700 million in 3 years in 3 counties, which is a pilot. And among others, we have the Kenya National Action Plan on the United Nations Security Council Resolution number 1325 on women, peace and security, among many others.
Right.
Yeah.
Anders, I would like to come to you, of course, as the UNFPA representative. What is the status of the implementation of some of the commitments that have been made?
So worldwide, all nations made commitments, but Kenya on the continent of Africa probably made the most concrete, the most forward-looking, and the most bold commitments of all nations on this continent. So, and that really makes a difference, not only for Kenyans and Kenya, but it sets the pace for other countries in the region. And a lot of countries will want to follow suit. So Kenya, in that sense, had an effect beyond its borders. And I really want to recognize Kenya's leadership for that. Of course, the outgoing administration and President Uhuru Kenyatta, he was very vocal on ending FGM. It's a law on the book. He also talked about other harmful practices and sexual SGBV, sexual gender-based violence. And I think that people are waiting for the new administration to be equally as vocal. I've heard from so many community organizations that they want to see that leadership, and that very strong voice does trickle down to the counties, down to the villages, down to the communities, and it makes the work much more smoother and easier for them to implement. People do listen to that, including the police and other important institutions. But Kenya also made some very specific commitments to finance the response to many of these things. And there was a specific commitment made to establishing a survivors fund through a co-financing modality to invest 100 million shillings every year in research and innovation to respond better to GBV. And we still have to see that fully materialize. And I really hope that some of these things will come online and there will be a strong leadership from this new government.
Right. I just want us to move now and talk about access to justice. I know we've talked about this a bit earlier on, but Jacqueline, coming to you, is there necessary support and protection by various actors when it comes to access to justice for survivors?
I must say yes, there have been deliberate efforts by starting from our colleague UNFPA to support support access to justice for victims of FGM and other victims of survivors of SGBV. Of course, it comes from all agencies, non-states and state actors. We have crew here. They've made a deliberate effort again to work with us in fighting SGBV. It has come in various ways. We have had our prosecutors trained to deal with FGM issues and SGBV generally. It has come again in form of supporting victims through the process, through different ways, psychosocial, financial for them to be able to attend court when it comes to that time to attend court, medical support. So yes, both the state and non-state actors have really come through for this, for the survivors of SGBV when it comes to access to justice. I must also say that most of the criminal justice players have also are working together in various efforts. Training, judiciary has also been very instrumental in giving time and placing, giving priority to matters of SGBV. And you can see really we have an SGBV court, first in Kenya, and hopefully I think it's among the first in the region, where we are now going to hear of SGBV cases being heard in an exclusively SGBV court, as opposed to what we are used to seeing. Matters were always jumbled together with, SGBV cases were jumbled together with other cases. But more needs to be done. I mentioned before we need, even as prosecutors and other members of the criminal justice system are dealing with SGBV cases, we need to really have the government first make efforts in setting up shelters. We do not have shelters for survivors. And that translates to us having our matters, either delay or we lose the matters even before, they go for hearing or in all the stages of the criminal justice system. And again, that means it translates to denying the survivors access to justice throughout the process.
Right. Wangeshu, just to bring you in on what Jacqueline has talked about, shelters and of course safe spaces, what measures should be put in place for women and girls who've been affected to have access to these spaces?
I think before we go to the shelters, let me mention that I think in terms of access to justice, we provide legal support to women who are survivors of violence. I think what I would want to see is to see it affordable. I would want to see it accessible, that you don't have to walk or drive or take a matatu to a very long distance to get that justice. I think also what I would want to see is that the turnaround time, that when those matters are brought in court, that they take the shortest time to be able to be determined so that the survivors then can start healing the trauma and really get the kind of justice that they're looking for. I think also what I would want to see in the judicial system is there has been a court decision that was made in May this year around the mandatory sentencing. And right now, what has happened is that because it has been declared unconstitutional, we have seen so many perpetrators then going back to court and saying, review the sentences. If someone had been charged 15 years, they want to be that to be reviewed so that the magistrate then can make a decision. We are going back many years ago where we had perpetrators being asked to slash or to clean a courtroom, and that becomes then the decisions that are made. What are we telling that survivor? That the trauma they went through, it is at a discretion. I think that is taking us back. We would like to see the judicial pronounce itself on this matter because we have a Sexual Offences Act. There was a reason behind a Sexual Offences Act that then gives a guideline. If it's rape, if it's attempted rape, if it's defilement, it's very clear within the Sexual Offences Act. So for me, I would want to, going forward, that matter is really put out there and we have a guideline so that we can't have all these perpetrators then going back and say, review the judgment that has been done. Now, coming to your question around shelters, I think I'm very, very passionate about this because we've supported survivors. We go to court and we come back. And when we come back, the survivor is asking you, right on the eye, where do I go? Do I go back to the perpetrator? So there is a very big gap around shelters. And I must say that the work being done by women's rights organizations to fill that gap is a lot of work. They do this with well-wishers money. Development partners support that piece of work in support of shelters. The young children who have been violated, they go to these shelters, and by the time they're in this, they find a home. They find a place, someone can be able to give them healing because there's a counselor. There's someone who can be able to talk to them. Some of them even go to school when they're in these shelters. One of the commitments around generation equality is around shelters that need to be supported by the state because it's our tax that need to put in the shelters. That way they're going to be sustainable. There are counties, Makueni, we don't need to go for benchmarking far. Makueni is one of them. Meru has a shelter supported by the state. The other, there's one other county that has a shelter. I think those shelters must be supported by the state with the resources. And how does that happen? We must have a policy in place. I think the ministry has already guided us on the policy, but also at the county level, move it from commitments, because the country is good at commitments. We cannot continue committing. Let's put money into it so that then we can be able to see very, very concrete, so that when someone goes to the county and they have been violated, they never want to go back to the same home that is violent and they will continue being violated.
Right, Wangeshi, thank you so much for, of course, those comments there. I just want us to now have like the last statements from the audience. I know there are a couple of people who wanted to say a few words. Martha? Yes, please. Kindly make it brief because of time.
Sorry, I'm not Martha, I'm Roslyn.
Yeah.
Mine, again, in just terms of the low-lying fruits. We have the women, our first ladies, in the county governments. The same way the previous government had the Beyond Zero. How do we then ensure that even in matters of GBV, we can go and look at the same system of Beyond Zero and bring it to the gender-based violence and make it as fast and effective as it needs to be done the way we worked with Beyond Zero?
Right, thank you very much. Anyone else?
All right, thank you. My name is Martha Sunda. I work for Childline Kenya as the executive director. And I just wanted to mention, we handle a lot of cases through the National Child Helpline Service 116, which we run with the government through the Directorate of Children's Services. And what we have established is that many of the perpetrators of violence against children are actually survivors of violence themselves. But their traumatic experiences were not dealt with when they needed to have been dealt with. So they have grown with it. Now they're in a position of authority or responsibility, and they don't know how better then to treat these children that they're responsible for. So it becomes a vicious cycle that just continues and continues. So even as we deal prevention, we need to look at that aspect of historic violation of these people that was not dealt with. And then there's also the normalization of violence through media, videos, movies, games. And so it becomes so normal. A child will tell you, my son told me, he's only 3 years old, he said,
Right.
Mom, I'll get a gun and douche you. You know, for him, it's okay, it's normal. And we cannot take that lightly. We can't say, oh, sorry, my son, that's okay. It's not okay. We need to start training them as young as they are that this is actually violence.
Right.
We will not condone it. We have to deal with it.
Right, Martha,
Thank
thank you
you.
very much. We really don't have time. I just want to come back to my panelists. Maybe in like 10 seconds, your closing remarks. Let's start with you, Andis.
No, thank you very much for having us. I think having a program on TV like this, having a public conversation with the entire nation is a fantastic starting point. So let us translate these things into action. There are so many ideas that came out, even just today, but let's have an open conversation. Everyone who is sitting out there, have a conversation with your neighbor, have a conversation in your community, and stand up for what's right.
Thank you for that. Jacqueline?
Thank you very much for hosting us. I must say, we have to be strong in fighting GBV. It can't be one person fighting it. And just to let you know that we are there when you cannot report anywhere else. The DPP is always there. The ODPP, you can start from ODPP and you'll get assistance. The last bit I must say is that we need to be on the lookout. There is a new form of SGBV that is coming up. Initially, we've heard a lot about FGM for children, but now we have FGM for women. Kiambu County is leading in that.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Just quickly, Josephat and Wangeshi, please.
Thank you. I wish to take this opportunity to say the government is very committed to strengthening prevention and response to gender-based violence. And the Cabinet Secretary currently in place is committed, has made commitments to support the work that is being done by the various stakeholders in aiding, preventing and aiding gender-based violence. So we start together through the Gender Sector Working Group to make it possible to prevent gender-based violence.
Your last.
For me, the final one is that we're investing a lot on response, and it's very, very important. But now we have evidence that prevention on violence against women and girls works. There are enough models around the world that have shown violence against women prevention works. So let's invest in prevention, speaking to couples on how to deal with conflicts. There's a model around that, engaging our communities. We're engaging men around issues of prevention of violence against women, providing services so that, for example, if someone has been violated, there is a shelter. That way we are able to deal with secondary prevention. So let's also invest in prevention, even as we look at response. Because I keep thinking, this is a river. We're on the bottom side of the river. We wait for the women to be violated. We give them legal support, psychosocial support. Let's go up the river and see who is violating the women and how do we cut the bleeding.
All right, thank you very much. Of course, thank you to my panelists for that great conversation that we've had here, and to the audience, of course, who've been listening and given their thoughts, of course, on this particular issue. Thank you so much for watching at home. My name is Fatia Mohammed Noor. KTN Prime is up next.
Transform Kenya. Empower our nation.